Hey everybody, hope you are enjoying the Explore the Bible study through Joshua as much as I have been on Sunday mornings in our Bible fellowship groups. And again, just thank you for all you guys do. This week we are in Joshua chapter 6. We're skipping over 5 just for the sake of the curriculum. But in chapter 5, we see this kind of recommitment to God. They have crossed the Jordan River, which we saw. They set up memorials to remember how God is faithful to them, which we saw last week. And then what we skip over in chapter 5 is we see all the men be circumcised who weren't circumcised in the wilderness as part of a recommitment to God, as part of entering the promised land and finding rest. We see that the Israelites celebrate their first Passover in the promised land, which is a pretty big deal. And also a really big deal that's only very briefly mentioned is there is no more need for manna because they are in the promised land now and they are eating from the fruit of the land or from the harvest of the land in Canaan, which is a big deal as well. And so we're going to see them really start to enter into the promised land through the conquest of Jericho this week, and that really begins them taking over the promised land and God ushering them into that promised land. We also see at the end of chapter 5 that Joshua meets the commander of the Lord's army, and that encourages him and gives him confidence in God. But when we get to chapter 6, like I said, we see the conquest really start to take place. It started with them crossing the Jordan River that we saw last week, but now we come back to the story of Rahab that we left off a couple weeks ago. Rahab hid the spies, and there was a promise made that if she were to keep this secret safe and that for her protection of the spies, that her and her family would be spared when Israel came to Jericho. And that sign that was given was the scarlet cord that would to hang from her window. And if that happens, when Israel shows back up, everyone in that household would be spared. And so, if you're a first reader of Scripture here, we're hanging on a little bit of a cliffhanger here. We don't know what happened to Rahab. We don't know if she's going to be spared. And in chapter 6, we find that story. And we start in chapter 6, verse 12. God has given them the instructions of what to do to go take over Jericho. And in 6, verse 12, which is the first verse of our study this week, we see immediate obedience from Joshua and the people. And a key theme this week, and again throughout all of Joshua and all of Scripture, is because of who God is, because he keeps his promises, because he is as powerful as he is, and he takes care of his people, we should live lives of faithful obedience. And here, a massive theme in this taking over of Jericho is faith and obedience, which will eventually lead to the walls of Jericho falling. Ultimately, it's God's power that brings this victory. All the glory goes to God. He is the one doing it. It is a miraculous thing that's about to happen, but they are called to faithful obedience in this moment so that those walls can come tumbling down. And that's exactly what happens. God gets the glory, but that opportunity for glory on God's behalf is made possible through the faithful obedience of Joshua and the people. Could God get glory without us? Of course. Of course. Just his creation gives him glory. Just him existing gives him all the glory that he would ever need. But what a gracious God we serve, that he allows us to be part of the process of bringing him glory and uses us as vessels for it. And we see Joshua and the nation of Israel do just that. And so, very familiar story. You're going to walk through it this week, but Israel marches around Jericho according to God's command one time a day on the seventh day, which is a very significant number. It's a number for completeness. You'll see that in your study guide for this week, so pay close attention to that. 7 is a very popular number in Scripture about completeness, and so they march on the seventh day 7 times around the city, and the walls come down after they shout for victory. And one of the big takeaways here for me is if Jericho is no match for God, then nothing we face today will ever be a match for God. If he can bring down the wall of Jericho, he can do anything. If a tomb is no match for Jesus, then nothing we face in this life is a match against God. including the devil himself, including the enemy, all the evil we will face, all the sin that we struggle with, it's no match for God. He is that powerful and He is that good. And because of that, we can live bold lives of faith because God is infinitely powerful and He always keeps His promises. So in this conquest and throughout the book of Joshua, we're going to see God's command to destroy cities. This is going to be a big theme. It could very well be a topic of conversation this week in your groups. This is a difficult conversation to have. This is a difficult thing to see in Scripture when He calls for the complete annihilation of cities and peoples, women, children, animals, everything. But two important things here to remember is sin has consequences, and sin deserves God's wrath through His judgment. It's the first thing. But the second thing is God is always patient, and there is always opportunity for mercy to escape God's judgment. If you look back in Genesis 15:13-16, God has been patient with Canaan. And the judgment could have been avoided, and He has been patient, but that sin deserves consequences. Another aspect to this that can kind of help us see what God is doing here through this command is this is the promised land, and right now this promised land needs to be purified. Sin is rampant throughout the land of all people, of all of these cities. And if you really look at and dive into Leviticus 18, we see a list of the sins that are going on in Canaan right now. And what's it's fascinating to see, but it should cause us to be brokenhearted. Is these sins trickle down to all ages? They impact the animals in Leviticus 18, and it is just this sin is rampant throughout the land, and the whole land needs to be purified. And so that's part of why that command comes into play here. And this is the same thing Christ is going to do when He returns. You get to the end of the story, Revelation 20:21, when He's removing all evil, casting everything into the lake of fire. He's purifying everything. He is removing all evil to make a new creation for us, a new heaven and a new earth. And this what's happening here as they enter into the promised land is a glimpse of what Christ will one day do for us, removing all evil. So this is a glimpse of that as well. And so be prepared for some difficult questions. Don't feel like we have to have all the answers, but hopefully that's a little helpful for you. Some of those key facts that supersede any of the questions that could come is sin has consequences, but God is merciful and patient and offers an opportunity for mercy before His judgment comes. And we see that Rahab herself and her family is a prime example of this mercy being shown and this patience being shown. She is spared as the walls of Jericho come down because of her faith and her obedience. And so, as a result of this story, our faith can be strengthened because God is infinitely powerful and He can and will do anything to keep His promises. And because of that, hopefully, we as Christians, we as a church, we as Bible fellowship groups can follow this example of Joshua and the people to, even if we're asked to do things that sound a little crazy, even if we're asked to do things a little unorthodox, but we know God's calling us to do something, even if it's something the world may seem as unwise, if we know it's God calling us to do it, we know He's faithful, we know He's powerful, and He can lead us through anything. So I'll be praying for you this week. Hope you have a great conversation around the book of Joshua, and I hope it strengthens everyone's faith in your groups and in your lives and in your families as well. Love you guys.